Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me. Today, we are going to talk about one of my favorite real estate topics that's kind of near and dear to my heart. It's called house hacking. Joining me today is author Robert Leonard. Robert, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So, the concept behind house hacking can be explained in a sentence, right? You buy a multifamily house, live in one side, rent out the other. But there's a lot more to it than that. So, what is house hacking? Why did you decide to write a book about it? And kind of why is it useful to people who want to maybe invest in real estate or become homeowners?
So I think there can be a lot of different definitions. My personal favorite of what is house hacking is to simplify it and just say it's purchasing a property with the goal of renting out any additional space that you have that you're not using to generate some income and reduce your costs. So as you mentioned, it can look like a multifamily property. You could do it with single family properties. You could do it with RVs. You could do it with vacation properties. So there's a lot of different ways that you could do this, but simply renting out any additional space that you have, whatever kind of property it is, to reduce your living costs. One of the reasons why it's such a great strategy is that it allows you to become a real estate investor with just little money down. Because you ask most real estate investors, I'd say if you ask 100 real estate investors, upwards of 75 to 80 of them would say that their biggest like hurdle or reason that they can't get into real estate is because they don't have enough capital. And this allows you to solve that because when you're house hacking, you are able to take advantage of owner occupied loans, which allows you to get lower down payment loans, which is typically you could even go as low as 0% technically if you have a VA loan up to maybe 3.5 or 5%. And so now you're able to buy an investment property for 5% down at towards the higher end. And that's significantly less than if you had to buy that same property with 20 or 25% down plus closing costs and things like that. So it's much easier to get into from a pure down payment and cash required to close perspective. And it also, I like to call it real estate with training wheels or landlording light because you're able to kind of learn how to become a real estate investor on kind of like easy mode or with training wheels.
Yeah, so you mentioned the low down payment option, and that's really, I guess, the biggest difference in the kind of the logistics of doing a house hack versus buying a traditional investment property. But there also some other benefits. People can live for free by house hacking, right?
Yeah, it's massive. That's one of the other massive benefits is that you can live for free. You're using that income from any other rental space that you have to reduce your costs. Just as an example, let's say your whole mortgage is $2,000 and you're living in a duplex and you rent out one side for $1,500. Now you're not living for free, you're living for $500, but that's relatively affordable. And if you think about it, if it's a duplex, usually both units are the same. And so somebody is paying $1,500 to live in the exact same unit as you. So you could assume that you would have to pay roughly $1,500 a month. So not only are you living for only $500 a month, but you could kind of see that you're saving $1,000 a month by house hacking rather than actually renting that space. Some of my other favorite benefits are that you now have a business. That other unit is now a rental, and you can have tax write-offs against that rental that you otherwise wouldn't have if you have a single family owner occupied home, like you just live there like a traditional homeowner.
The whole reason you wrote the book, like any other kind of real estate investing, there's a right and a wrong way to do it. So you mentioned the financing already, which a lot of people aren't aware that you could use an owner occupied loan to buy a property like that. I don't want to give away too much of the book, but in addition to financing, what are some of the other just kind of broad topics that people that you consider when you're doing a house hack?
So one of the things that I consider heavily, and that I think a lot of newer house hackers, maybe you're doing it for the first time, that they don't necessarily think about is what I call the post hack or post house hack analysis. Because if you're going into this and you're just going to live there for a year, a couple years, and then you're going to sell it when you leave, like you would a single family traditional home ownership situation, this isn't too big of a deal. But if your goal is to buy this, live for cheap or free while you live there, and then keep it as a rental when you're done and move on to something else, this is very, very important. And so people will often run the numbers before they buy a deal. It's very kind of straightforward and understand that you need to know if you're buying a good deal. But what people don't usually do is run the analysis on the back end as what is this going to be like as a rental when I move out? Is this even going to be a good deal? And so sometimes you can have a property that's a great house hack and not a great rental, or you can have something that's going to be a great rental but maybe not so great on the house hack. So you kind of want to find the sweet spot of what's good for both, and then make sure you're only acquiring those types of properties if that's your goal. A lot of times somebody will buy it and it turns out it's not actually a good rental when their plan was to rent it afterwards, and they're kind of stuck in a rough spot. So I think that that's one of the things that I do every single time I house hack. I've house hacked 3 times now. It's one of the things that I highly encourage newer house hackers to make sure that they focus on.
My first real estate purchase of my life was a house hack, and it was kind of by accident. It was to be able to afford a house in a very expensive real estate market. I lived in Key West, Florida at the time, and my wife and I bought a duplex, rented out one side, and that's kind of how I fell in love with real estate investing in the first place over 10 years ago. So you mentioned you've done 3 house hacks. Um, what's your favorite of the 3 to kind of share with investors as an example?
My favorite of the 3, it's really tough because I did 3 different strategies. So the first one I did was a single family rent by the room. Second one was a live in flip. And the third one is kind of your more traditional duplex, live in one side, rent out the other. I think my favorite is probably the one I'm in now, which is a duplex, live in one side, rent out the other, just because it's kind of the best in terms of lifestyle. It's basically like I live in a single family home. It's one of the more profitable of the 3. The single family rent by the room was really profitable as well, but the comfortability, I have this analysis or this kind of example where I talk about the more comfort you give up, the more profitable you will be. And so that's how it was with the single family property. Was I gave up a lot of comfort, but I also got a lot more profitability from it. With my duplex right now, it's kind of the best of both worlds. And so I would say that that's my favorite now.
So I could tell you one mistake I made when I house hacked for the first time was I didn't screen my first tenants at all. I ended up I ended up having a tenant that went to jail 2 weeks later. So aside from that, what's a common mistake that you could share that you either made or see people make that you would advise people to avoid?
So I did that same mistake. Thankfully, however, it wasn't really a mistake because it was still a mistake in that it was a bad decision to do. I didn't screen this first tenant at all. I had no idea what I was doing. It was an accidental house hack, just like you said. I really didn't know what I was doing with that first one. So I did make that same mistake. Turns out it was a great tenant, worked out really well for me. So it wasn't too big of a mistake. So I do see that. That's very common as a mistake. I also see, like I mentioned, the post hack analysis, people skipping that. That's another mistake. But another big mistake I see is a lot of times if you're acquiring a property that is a multifamily property and you're going to house hack it, you're probably a lot of times you're acquiring it with another tenant already in place. And so I see a lot of people mismanage that relationship with the existing tenants. So, you might have a lease coming up, you're not sure how to handle it, things like that. I see a lot of people handle the turnover of lease incorrectly in terms of keeping rents the same, putting a lease in place, things like that.
Okay. So your book is called The Everything Guide to House Hacking. Can you tell us a little bit about when does it come out? Where can people get it? And yeah, the details.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for asking. So it's available pretty much anywhere that you can buy books. It's on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, Walmart, Target, pretty much anywhere you can buy books. It's available, and it comes out on September 6th. You can pre-order it now. So if you're seeing this before it releases, definitely available for pre-order. But you can also get it after it goes live as well. That's when it will be released. You can also learn more about the book at everythinghousehacking.com.
So you mentioned this is your third house hack. Do you think it'll be your last, or do you kind of like have like a chess player's mentality of a few more in the future?
So that's a great question. It's something I've been grappling with a little bit. So I always said I'm not 30. I'm only 27. So I always said that I would house hack until I was 30, and then I'd kind of be done. That was just kind of my cutoff. So I could see another 2 or so in the future, but I could also see maybe one more. I could also see this potentially being the last one. At the time when I made that plan, my career and my kind of financial position was at a different spot than where it is today. So it kind of allows me to have different options today than I might have had before. So that could change kind of my plan. But I could see one more, maybe 2, but it most likely this will be my last or one more, I think.
Just one more kind of general question. Where, in terms of your broad investment strategy, how much of it is real estate focused? Are you also like a stock investor? Are you also, I assume you diversify at least a little bit, but where does real estate fit in?
Yeah, so I actually have a lot more experience as a stock investor than I do as a real estate investor. Like I said, I'm only 27, but I started studying Warren Buffett when I was 14 years old, my freshman year in high school. There's a whole story behind that, but I'll just kind of leave it there. Is that I started studying Warren Buffett, went out to Omaha, been to the Berkshire meeting a few times now. Started when I was 14, studied him for about 10 years before I got into real estate at all. And so I was a really, really big fan of him. My whole kind of plan was to become wealthy in from stock investing because I thought you needed a lot of money to get started in real estate. It wasn't that I wasn't interested in real estate. It's just that I didn't think I could do it. So before I did that accidental house hack, I was all about the stock market, thought I'd make my wealth there, then kind of preserve it and grow it through real estate. But ever since I learned that I could be a real estate investor, I've kind of transitioned. All of my focus now is primarily in real estate. And now I'm more of just an index fund kind of guy in terms of the stock market. But yeah, so I'd say I have 8 to 10 years to maybe even 12 years now of experience in the stock market versus maybe 4 or 5 years of real estate experience.
I did my first house hack at the age of 31, and wish I would have gotten started earlier. You're wise beyond your years. So with that, Robert, thanks so much for joining me. I know releasing a book, there's a ton of publicity you have to do, so I thank you for spending a few minutes with us. And I wish you the best of luck, and I can't wait to read the book when it comes out.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
I want to thank The Motley Fool for sponsoring this video. The Motley Fool is a company that provides investing insight and stock recommendations for investors of all skill sets and risk levels. You all know how much I love researching new stocks and trying to find the next best investment. So I'm proud to partner with The Motley Fool to bring you 10 stock picks from their popular product, Stock Advisor. Stock Advisor has beaten the market by more than 230%. So go to fool.com/Frankel to get your 10 stock picks now.